Lumos. Ah, there you are. Splendid. Let's begin, shall we? Nox. Our next supernova is both a best-selling author and philanthropist. In 2015, she was given the British Red Cross Humanity Award for all of her charitable efforts. Her first charity was Volant, while her second one was Lumos, a non-profit organization that works to ensure children around the world are growing up in a safe and loving environment. She also financially supports numerous organizations around the world. Did you know that she also gave away close to 70% of her net worth in 2011? This heroine is obsessed with charm bracelets and has literally fought off dementors and prevailed. I'm certain you've guessed who it is by now, but if you've been hit with an OBLIVIATE charm, allow me to assist you. It's J.K. Rowling. Of Scottish and French descent, J.K. Rowling, or Joanne Rowling, was born on July 31st, 1965, in Yate, England, a quaint town next to Bristol, England, to proud parents Peter and Anne Rowling. The strategic decision to use initials instead of her full name would be later made by her publishers. They postulated that using a gender-neutral name would appeal to both genders, making males more inclined to read the books. They also asserted that she needed more than one initial. Rowling agreed, adding K as a tribute to her grandmother Kathleen. When recalling her journey, she laughs as she remembers how desperate she was to get her books published. There was little she wouldn't have agreed to. She said, quote, "They could have called me Enid Snodgrass. I just wanted to be published." Even at a young age, Joanne knew she wanted to be a writer and wrote her first book at the age of 6, a story about a rabbit called, well, Rabbit. What else do you expect a 6-year-old to name her book? At 11, she wrote her first novel about 7 cursed diamonds and the people who owned them. In 1964, her parents Peter and Anne met at King's Cross Station, which Rowling would later use as a gateway to the wizarding world. They later married on March 14, 1965. Fast forward a few years, on a delayed train from Manchester to King's Cross Station, that's in London, Rowling contrived her brilliant idea of Harry Potter. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's use our time turners to go back in time and find out more about her early life. Brilliance is definitely in Rowling's DNA, as her father was an aircraft engineer at Rolls-Royce factory in Bristol, while her mother was a science technician in the chemistry department at Wydian Comprehensive, where she attended high school. She grew up in Gloucestershire, England, and Chepstow, a town in southeast Wales, with her parents and sister Diane, who was born in their home when Joanne was 23 months. As a child, Joanne would often write stories of fantasy and would often read them to her sister. Jessica Mitford's autobiography, Hans and Rebels, was a literary influence in Rowling's life. When her great-aunt gave her a copy in her early teenage years, Mitford became her heroine, and Rowling would later go on to read all of her books. As if it's not hard enough being a teenager already, Rowling described how devastating it was when they found out that at age 35, her mother Anne was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a condition that affects the central nervous system, causing problems in the brain and spinal cord, leading to a variety of potential symptoms, including vision problems, decreased arm or leg movement, and problems with balance. After the diagnosis, Anne's health deteriorated over time, and in 1990, she passed away at age 45 from complications related to MS. Rowling recounts her regret that her mother did not live to see the first Harry Potter novel get published. She also recounts her complicated and estranged relationship with her father, who she is now not on speaking terms with. In an article in the New Yorker magazine, she iterates how her father remarried only 2 years after her mother's death. After attending her wedding to Neil Murray in 2001 in Scotland, Joanna and Peter stopped speaking 2 years later. She went on to explain how this break in their relationship began in December 2003, when her father put up his rare first editions of the Harry Potter series for sale on Sotheby's auction site. Some of the books did not sell, but others, including a copy of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, did. It was gifted to him in 2000 on Father's Day and signed, quote, "Lots of love from your firstborn," end quote. It also included a drawing of a hand reaching for a running gnome. It went for $48,000. Her astounding resilience shone consistently throughout her life. Despite her hardships as a teenager, she went on to do very well in high school, where only a minority of students went on to college. In 1982, she took the entrance exams for Oxford University, but was not accepted. Instead, she studied French at the University of Exeter, an institution known for being extremely posh, as she calls it. She unexpectedly found herself among private schoolgirls in pin-straight uniforms and shiny pearls. Martin Sorrell, a French professor at the university at the time, described her as, quote, quietly competent student with a denim jacket and dark hair, who in academic terms gave the appearance of doing what was necessary, end quote. Rowling, however, has a very different account of that time and describes not doing any work whatsoever. She would much rather have been listening to the Smiths and reading Dickens and Tolkien. In hindsight, she describes how it was a good thing that she didn't get into Oxford. As she says, quote, I was intimidated enough by Exeter. Imagine I would have fallen apart at Oxford. I never would have opened my mouth. End quote. After graduating in 1986, she worked for a while at Amnesty International in London, a non-profit organization focusing on human rights. In 1999, she had her life-changing Harry Potter inspiration and began developing a detailed outline for the 7-book series. In 1991, she took a job as an English teacher in Porto, Portugal, where she met her first husband, George Arantes, a journalist. She continued teaching at night, and in the summer of 1993, her daughter Jessica was born. After enduring an abusive relationship, her marriage to George came to an end shortly after the birth of their daughter, and she later returned to Britain with Jessica at the end of 1993. According to an article in the New Yorker magazine, Rowling owned very little at the time. She explained, quote, I was very depressed. I felt life was a train wreck. I'd carry this baby out of it, and I was in this place that was very alien and cold and quite grim, end quote. She signed up for welfare benefits and found a small apartment where she lived with Jessica for a few months. Despite not having much, what she did have was the first 3 chapters of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, even though she describes she would often not have the focus to write. She accredits her daughter Jessica that she gave her the motivation to go to the doctor and say, quote, I think I'm not quite right and I need some help here, end quote. Rowling explained that seeking help made a huge difference. She later began therapy and continued writing Harry Potter. She described how things began coming together in her head. Her life may have still been a mess externally, but she felt better equipped to deal with it. After moving into a better apartment thanks to a close friend who loaned her the money, things began looking up. In 1995, she finished the first book in the Harry Potter series. Looking back, Rowling explains how she always found it difficult to articulate her depression. She asserts that depression and sadness are, quote, different experiences. Later, she created the notorious creatures known as dementors, which is a manifestation of her depression on paper. Dementors are creatures that feed off of happiness of the living, torturous beings that suck the life right out of you. Rowling describes her life on welfare as the most soul-destroying thing. She was a broke single mother who, quote, had to decide whether my baby would be handed over to somebody else for most of her waking hours or be cared for by her mother in far from luxurious surroundings. I chose the latter option, end quote. I know for many of us extreme Harry Potter fans, it's hard to imagine, but there was a time where the first manuscript of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was rejected 12 times. I know, it's incredibly preposterous. It's downright wrong. After finishing up the manuscript in small cafes around Edinburgh, she enthusiastically bound it up into a folder and sent it off to a publishing agent along with her hopes and dreams. She explains how nothing was sent back but a slip of paper explaining how the agent's list was full and they weren't interested in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. They didn't even have the courtesy to return the folder back to Rowling, who at the time had little money and couldn't afford to buy new folders to send out to other agents. Exhibiting extreme bravery and resilience like a true Gryffindor, Rowling never gave up, and in 1995, she wrote a letter to Christopher Little, a fairly doubtful London literary agent, saying, quote, Dear Mr. Little, I enclose a synopsis and sample chapters for a book I intended for children aged 9 to 12. I would be very grateful if you could tell me if you would be interested in seeing the full manuscript. Yours sincerely, Joanna Rowling. End quote. Little took Rowling on, and a year later she made a humble deal with Bloomsbury, a British publisher, and in June 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published with an initial print run of 500 copies. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone would go on to win Children's Book of the Year at the British Book Awards and a Golden Award in the Nestle Smarties Book Prize, which is voted for by children. The book also sold to Scholastic in New York for more than $100,000. With all of its success, the series of course met some critics along the way. Alan Taylor, a journalist and editor of the Scottish Review of Books, despaired and said of her readers, quote, "They were giving their childhood to this woman. They were starting at 7, and by the time they were 16, they were still reading bloody Harry Potter. 16-year-olds wearing wizard outfits who should have been shagging behind the bike shed and smoking marijuana, reading Camus," end quote. Sorry, Alan, but I'm in my 20s and I wear my wizard outfit with pride. The series has sold more than 500 million copies worldwide, becoming the best-selling book series in history. After publishing the first book in the series, Rowling continued to map out the series in great detail and mindfulness. Ian Rankin remembered bumping into her one day in a coffee shop, saying, quote, "It was incredible to see her, writing longhand, doing this family tree for a character. I can't think of any other author I know who would go into that kind of detail for something that's not going to be there on the page. It was like a video game where you never got to see the edge of the rendered landscape," end quote. Despite the detail in the final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and its extended epilogue, there's so much that Rowling knows but hasn't written. After the final book was published in 2007, she announced that Headmaster Dumbledore was gay. She also stated that Dudley, Harry's cousin, ended up having 2 children. Minna Fry, former marketing director of Bloomsbury, said that she and Rowling coined the phrase denial marketing, explaining, quote, "The more people want, the less you give." As previously mentioned, Rowling married Dr. Neil Murray in 2001, and they had 2 children, David and Mackenzie. Rowling's family often struggled maintaining their privacy. For example, she recounts to the Inquiry that when Jessica was 5, she returned from school with a note from a reporter in her backpack, allegedly placed there by a parent of a classmate. Jessica was later photographed, and the image was published in direct defiance of British rule about paparazzi shots of children. In recent years, Rowling and her husband were photographed on an Edinburgh street. The published photograph showed the face of their son, David, at 19 months. Outraged, Rowling spoke out publicly about the difficulty of having to take quote-unquote preventative measures to avoid further intrusion. She once wrote in a witness statement, quote, "It pains me that my family and I do not appear to have the choice of living our lives in the same way that other members of the general public do," end quote. As admired as she isn't without controversy, and in June of this year, she was under hot water for her controversial tweets about the transgender community. Fans and stars alike spoke out against her.
Well, what exactly did she say?
I'm glad you asked. I'll touch upon the subject lightly. On June 6, 2020, she tweeted, quote, "People who menstruate, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out. Women, wimpund, woo mud," end quote. Despite receiving a ton of backlash, Rowling did not back down. Instead, she went into more detail about her views, saying, quote, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth. The idea that women like me, who've been empathetic to trans people for decades, feeling kinship because they're vulnerable in the same way as women, for example, to male violence, air quote, hate trans people because they think sex is real and has lived consequences, is a nonsense," end quote. She continued by saying, quote, "I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were being discriminated against on the basis of being trans. But at the same time, my life has been shaped by being a female. I do not believe it's hateful to say so," end quote. Understandably, the trans community took to Twitter to articulate their outrage at Rowling's opinions. Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter himself, was the first star of the series to release a statement in response to Rowling's comments. I'll slightly touch upon what Radcliffe tweeted. He stated, quote, "While Jo is unquestionably responsible for the course my life has taken, as someone who has been honored to work with her and continues to contribute to the Trevor Project for the last decade, and just as a human being, I feel compelled to say something at this moment. Transgendered women are women. Any statement to the contrary erases the identity and dignity of transgender people and goes against all advice given by professional healthcare associations who have far more expertise on this subject matter than either Jo or I," end quote. Other Harry Potter-verse stars like Bonnie Wright, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson also spoke out against her tweets. Robbie Coltrane, better known as Hagrid, is one of the few actors from the Harry Potter world to defend Rowling to the Radio Times, saying, quote, "I don't think what she said was offensive, really. I don't know why there's a whole Twitter generation of people who hang around waiting to be offended. They wouldn't have won the war, would they?" That's me talking, like a grumpy old man. But you just think, oh, get over yourself, wise up, stand up straight, and carry on, end quote. Rowling has also gone on to publish 2 small affiliate volumes, which appear in the series as Harry Potter school books within the novels. In March 2001, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them and Quidditch Through the Ages were published to aid comic relief. In December 2008, The Tales of Beetle the Bard, another companion volume to the series, was published in aid of her international children's charity, Lumos. She also started a digital company called Pottermore in 2012, which was changed to Wizarding World Digital in 2019. Also in 2012, she published her first novel for adults titled The Casual Vacancy, which has been translated into 44 languages. Ever wonder who Robert Galbraith is? Yep, that's J.K. Rowling too. The author also writes crime novels under that pseudonym. When COVID-19 hit and changed life as we know it, Rowling, along with Wizarding World partners, took to the online world, launching the Harry Potter at-home initiative to entertain children during the pandemic by having celebrities read the first Harry Potter book aloud and making it free through audiobook and ebook streaming. In May of 2020, she announced another measure to help families stay mentally active during lockdown, the Ichabog, a story for young children that would be released a few chapters at a time online. She also stated that there would be an illustration competition for the book, where children could submit their artwork and the winning pieces would be published with the full book in November 2020. Profits made will be going to charities to assist individuals affected by the pandemic. Rowling has changed the lives of her readers forever, bringing to life the characters we know and love. Although she's had her share of struggles, she reminds us of the importance of failure. In her commencement speech at a Harvard graduation, she said, quote, "Why do I talk about the benefits of failure? Simply because failure meant stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and I began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me," end quote. Did you catch that audio clip we just played for you? Can you guess who it is? We'll give you a hint. Just like J.K. Rowling, he too was born in England.
Who? Who the could that be?